The hidden trauma of isolation, rebuilding connection in a post pandemic world. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I recently had the privilege of interviewing Jeannine Orange, a visionary advocate whose groundbreaking work during the pandemic has fundamentally transformed how we understand trauma in Black communities. Jeannine isn't just an expert, she's a revolutionary force who saw beyond the surface of our collective suffering to identify what was truly happening beneath. Her courage to speak truth when others remain silent has quite literally saved lives and reshaped how we approach healing in professional spaces. When we think about the pandemic, what immediately comes to mind? For most of us, it's the fear of illness, the masks, the social distancing protocols. But Jeannine Orange revealed something far more profound, something that has been hiding in plain sight all along. The most devastating aspect of the pandemic wasn't just the virus itself, it was the isolation, the disconnection, the severing of human bonds that sustain us, particularly within Black professional and entrepreneurial communities. This insight might seem simple at first glance, but it's actually quite radical when we consider how we've framed the pandemic narrative. We focused intensely on physical health metrics, on case counts and hospitalizations. What we haven't adequately addressed is the profound emotional and psychological trauma that came from being cut off from our networks, our mentors, our support systems. For Black professionals and entrepreneurs, especially, this isolation wasn't merely uncomfortable, it created conditions for lasting trauma that affected mental health, productivity, and even personal safety. The very measures designed to keep us physically safe inadvertently created different kinds of danger: emotional distress, vulnerability to abuse, and profound loneliness that many are still struggling to overcome. Let me share something that might surprise you. During the height of lockdowns, calls to domestic violence hotlines surged by 25% in many major cities. Behind closed doors, isolation became a weapon that abusers could wield with devastating effectiveness. For entrepreneurs who suddenly lost income, the inability to physically leave toxic environments became a crisis within a crisis. This is not just speculation or anecdotal evidence. The data is clear and compelling. Consider the work of the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation, founded by actress Taraji P. Henson after witnessing her father's struggles with mental illness as a Vietnam veteran. During the pandemic, they launched a virtual therapy program specifically focused on supporting Black Americans facing mental health challenges due to isolation. What they discovered was heartbreaking. Participants reported not just garden variety stress, but alarming increases in anxiety, depression, and instances of domestic tension resulting directly from forced separation from their usual communities. One participant described it as drowning in silence while everyone pretended we were just working from home. The foundation responded by providing free teletherapy sessions tailored specifically for Black individuals navigating pandemic induced loneliness. Over just 6 months, more than 5,000 individuals accessed these culturally competent counseling services. The impact was immediate and measurable: improved coping skills, reduced feelings of isolation, and a gradual return to emotional stability. But here's what makes this particularly relevant to Jeannine Orange's insights. The foundation didn't just treat symptoms, they recognized that the isolation itself was the wound that needed healing. They understood that connection, even virtual connection, was the medicine. This understanding represents a fundamental shift in how we think about trauma. Traditionally, we've focused on dramatic acute events as the primary sources of trauma. But what if some of the deepest trauma comes not from what happens to us, but from what stops happening? From the connections that are severed, the communities that are disbanded, the support systems that suddenly disappear. Let's look at another powerful example that Jeannine Orange shared. Therapy for Black Girls, founded by Dr. Joy Harden Bradford, saw exponential growth in its online community forums as members sought refuge from loneliness brought on by remote work mandates during COVID lockdowns. Many users of this platform struggled with feeling invisible at work while simultaneously juggling caregiving responsibilities at home, all without their traditional social outlets or support structures. They were experiencing what psychologists call invisibility trauma, the profound stress that comes from feeling unseen, unheard, and unacknowledged. One member, a marketing executive and single mother, shared that she would sometimes go entire days without speaking a single word aloud. I started talking to myself just to hear a human voice, she admitted. Then I'd log into the Therapy for Black Girls forum and finally feel like I existed again. Dr. Bradford responded by expanding access via weekly group chats moderated by licensed counselors. These sessions addressed topics such as burnout prevention and self care strategies specifically relevant to high achieving women navigating pandemic stressors. The results were remarkable. Community engagement tripled between March 2020 and March 2021. Surveys showed significant improvements in members' sense of belongingness despite ongoing physical distancing measures. What had begun as a podcast and resource hub quickly evolved into one of America's largest digital safe spaces for professional women seeking culturally affirming peer support amid crisis conditions. This example powerfully demonstrates that tech enabled peer networks can offset some harms caused by isolation and foster resilience even under extreme social strain. It shows us that community isn't just a nice to have, it's essential infrastructure for our emotional and psychological well being. But perhaps the most striking example Jeannine Orange shared reveals the complex intersection between economic hardship, isolation, and vulnerability to abuse. BEAM, the Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective, created emergency microgrants for entrepreneurs who lost business income due to pandemic closures. But they discovered something alarming. Recipients described not only financial precarity, but increased exposure to abusive environments because they could no longer afford alternative housing after losing revenue streams tied to their businesses. One grant recipient, a hair salon owner, had been slowly saving to move away from an emotionally abusive partner. When her salon was forced to close, those savings quickly evaporated, leaving her trapped in a situation that grew increasingly dangerous as isolation intensified. The pandemic didn't create the abuse, she later shared, but it removed every escape route I had carefully built. In other words, economic vulnerability and social isolation created a perfect storm that trapped many entrepreneurs in unsafe living situations. The trauma wasn't just emotional, it was physical, immediate, and dangerous. Beam's response was innovative and holistic. They paired microgrant funding with facilitated healing circles conducted virtually, offering both material relief and structured opportunities for connection and healing among peers facing similar intersecting traumas. This dual approach helped recipients stabilize financially while reducing reports of acute psychological distress over time. Beam raised over $500,000, distributed across hundreds of impacted entrepreneurs since spring 2020, setting new standards for holistic post crisis recovery programs that blend economic empowerment with emotional restoration. What these examples reveal, and what Jeannine Orange so powerfully articulated, is that isolation isn't just uncomfortable, it's actively harmful. It creates conditions for trauma that can persist long after lockdown orders are lifted and mask mandates are relaxed. This understanding challenges us to rethink how we approach healing in a post pandemic world. If disconnection was the wound, then reconnection must be the medicine. But not just any kind of reconnection. We need intentional, thoughtful, culturally responsive approaches to rebuilding our social fabric. For Black professionals and entrepreneurs, especially, this means creating spaces where people can be fully seen and heard. It means acknowledging the unique challenges faced by those who were already navigating systemic barriers before the pandemic added new layers of difficulty. It means recognizing that healing happens in community, not in isolation. As Jeannine Orange emphasized, community matters more than ever. Building intentional connections, both online and offline, is essential for healing from pandemic related traumas and for ongoing professional growth. This isn't just about having people to socialize with, it's about creating networks of mutual support, mentorship, and accountability that can help us navigate challenges and celebrate successes. But rebuilding connection requires more than just showing up to networking events or joining online forums. It requires vulnerability, authenticity, and a willingness to acknowledge our struggles. It requires us to be vigilant in recognizing signs of emotional distress among colleagues or within ourselves so we can seek help early and support one another proactively. This brings me to what I believe is the most important insight from my conversation with Jeannine Orange. The path forward requires us to reimagine what strength looks like. For too long, particularly in Black communities, strength has been equated with stoicism, with pushing through pain, with handling everything alone. But true strength might actually look like reaching out for help when we need it. It might look like admitting when we're struggling. It might look like prioritizing connection over productivity. Softness is not weakness, it's a radical act of self love. This perspective invites us to drop the superwoman cape, to unlearn survival mode, and to embrace a different way of being in the world, one that prioritizes our well being and our connections with others. The pandemic forced us into isolation, but as we emerge from its shadow, we have an opportunity to create something better than what existed before. We can build communities that truly support the whole person, not just their professional achievements or their economic output, but their emotional and psychological well being too. So I challenge you today, look around this room. See the people beside you not as networking opportunities, but as potential lifelines, as possible sources of the connection that heals. As fellow travelers on this journey toward wholeness, what would change if starting today you approach every interaction with the understanding that connection isn't just pleasant, it's necessary for survival? What would shift if you recognize that reaching out isn't a sign of weakness, but a profound act of courage and wisdom? The trauma of isolation was real. Its effects continue to reverberate through our communities. But by acknowledging this reality, by creating spaces for healing, and by reaching out to one another with compassion and understanding, we can begin to rebuild what was lost. How are you actively rebuilding meaningful connections, not just professionally, but emotionally? Who might need your outreach right now? These aren't idle questions. They are the foundation of our collective healing. Let us leave here today with a sacred commitment that no one in our circles will ever again suffer in silence, that we will be brave enough to reach out when we're struggling and attentive enough to notice when others are, that we will build communities where vulnerability is welcomed, where softness is celebrated, and where no one has to face their battles alone. The most radical act in our disconnected world is to connect deeply, authentically, and consistently. This is our challenge. This is our calling. This is our path to healing. Thank you